Hello, and welcome to our video explanation of Chapter 2 of the book Exploring Strategy. Today we're going to talk about the macro environment, but first we need to explain the other layers of the business environment. First, we have the organization. This is all about the internal part of an organization. Secondly, we have the competitors and market, which is surrounding the immediate surrounding of the organization. After that, we have the industry or sector, and that makes up the next layer within this broad macro environment. And finally, we have the micro environment, which we're going to talk about today, and consists of a broad environment factors that impact to a greater or lesser extent many organizations, industries, and sectors. There are different tools you can use to analyze the macro environment. First, we have the pastel, which examine the macro environmental factors according to 6 key types: political, economical, social, technological, ecological, and legal. These factors include both market and non-market aspects. Moving on with forecasting. Forecasting aims to predict with varying degrees of precision of certainty. Macro-environmental forecasting draws on pastel analysis and often makes use of 3 conceptual tools, which are megatrends, inflection points, and weak signals. A megatrend typically sets the direction for other factors. Inflection points are moments when trends shift in a direction, for instance turning sharply upwards or downwards. And weak signals are advanced signs of future trends and are particularly helpful in identifying inflection points. Next up, we have the scenario analysis. This is a technique that develops a plausible alternative view of how the environment might develop in the future. Scenario analysis differs from forecasting because it avoids predictions about the future. It's more about learning different possibilities for environmental change. These 3 tools are used for analyzing the macro environment. The first tool we're going to explain is the pastel analysis. The pastel analysis mainly focuses on 6 things, which are the political aspects, the economical aspects, the social aspects, the technological aspects, the environmental aspects, and lastly we have the legal aspects. After conducting the pastel analysis, you will have to look for the key drivers for change. The key drivers for change are the environmental factors likely to have a high impact on your industry and sector, and success or failure of strategies within them. Next up is forecast approaches. There are 3 different forecast approaches, namely single point forecasting, range forecasting, and alternative future forecasting. And the direction of change are part of the forecast as well, which we already said in the beginning, which are megatrends, inflection points, and weak signals. First, we have the single point forecast. The single point forecasting is where organizations have such confidence about the future that they will provide just one forecast number, as you can see on the movie. Next up, we have range forecasting. This is where organizations have less certainty, suggesting a range of possible outcomes. You have unlikely outcomes, possible outcomes, and probable outcomes, which differ from positive to negative outcomes, as you can see on the movie as well. And finally, we have alternative future forecasting, which typically involves even less certainty than the range forecasting and focus on a set of possible yet distinct futures. Instead of continuously graduate range of likelihoods, alternative futures are discontinuous, they happen or they do not, with radical different outcomes. Finally, we have the scenario analysis. The scenarios offer plausible alternative views of how the microenvironment might develop in the future, typically in the long term. The scenario process has different steps. First up, defining the scenario scope. The scope refers to the subject of the scenario analysis and the timestamp. Next up, we have identifying the key drivers for change, which, as the title says, you have to identify the key drivers. Next up, we have to develop scenarios or stories. As in a film, scenarios are basically stories. Having selected opposing key drivers for change, it is necessary to knit together plausible stories that incorporate both key drivers and the other factors into a coherent story. Next up, we have identifying impacts of the alternative scenarios on organization, which is really important in scenario building. And finally, we have monitor the progress. Once the various scenarios are drawn up, organizations should monitor progress over time to alert themselves to whether and how developments actually fits scenario expectations. Although the future can never be predicted perfectly, it's clearly important that entrepreneurs and managers try to analyze their environments as carefully as they can in order to anticipate and, if possible, take advantage of such environmental changes. We want to thank you for watching, and this is the end.